Life is complex.
So is our mental health. It cannot be understood by diagnosis alone.
Our philosophy is treat the person, not the mental illness.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Humanizing Mental Health. I'm Jeremy Alcorn,
And I'm Trent Akers.
and today we are joined by Devin Fish. We're very grateful to have you on this episode. Welcome to the show.
Yep. Thank you for having me. And, always love having a conversation and telling people about the story.
So today we're going to be exploring some pretty powerful things. The message that Devin has, and really we want to emphasize the growth and the ability to work through and find a story of wellness beyond resilience, but wellness. And so I'd like to really start. Devin is a recent veteran. I understand you said actually that's been just 3 weeks ago that you actually have finished your military service.
Yep. So I just got done. I left with about 10 years of military service. I was like 1 month shy of it, but I just got out on May 5th was my last day.
Gotcha. So you had recently then finished and published a book, and that is the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. Is really the not just the content, but the focus of your book. And the book is really captured in its title, "Asking the Hard Questions."
Yeah. So answering the hard questions. I love the title of the book, and when I originally went in, they're like, "Hey, do you want to think about changing the title?" I'm like, absolutely not. Completely stuck on it. Because it's not just one title, but it's actually two titles. So it's like answering the hard questions, and then the subtitle is "Let it be the end of the chapter, not the end of the book." And both of them are a different type of reflection that I did after I sent myself to the hospital around 2019. And the very first hard question I had asked myself was like, do I want to die? Because I submitted myself for suicidal ideations. And then so that's where the book actually gets its title from. And then Let It Be at the End of the Chapter, not the end of the book. That's where after the hospital, that's when I start making my recovery in life. So that's also so they kind of piggyback on each other.
And right there, I think that's very key, that a lot of people think that, you go into the hospital for suicidal ideations, you become stable, and then you move on. But it's really about building that resilience all the way through.
Yeah, 100% agree. Because I talk about it very often in the book. I'm like, the healing process doesn't, it's not overnight. It wasn't a day, a month, or a year for me. So to get my life back on track, it took me about 3 years. And that was physically like changing my mind while, staying in the military and going through a bunch of like stressful situations still. Because like once I got out of the hospital, I also went on like a rotation immediately. And I was still like a brand new NCO at the time. So I had soldiers under me, brand new soldiers. And so there's a lot of things on my plate, and to try to balance all those things took a very long time.
Wow, like just hearing that, like it's almost like you literally hit the ground running. So it wasn't even just a gradual process. It's like you got well, and then I can't imagine what it would be like to try and maintain that wellness, because I'm thinking for a lot of people, just gradually reintegrating yourself into your family, into your life, but you were put right into a position where you had to be in charge of other people. And they're looking for you for support. And right soon before that, you were looking to others. So that's quite a balancing act, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. So a major thing that helped me kind of get through it was a couple things I learned at the hospital. And, if and this is really what helped me change my life, was there's like two little pamphlets in the hospital I'd read. And the first one was like, not all suicidal people want to end their life, which, I came to that same conclusion. And, it's really a call out for like help, because they don't know where to go anymore. And then the second
Mm.
one said that you can have a perfectly healthy mind, but if you believe you're depressed, then your brain will make you depressed, and I kind of took that pamphlet and I saw, okay, well, I know I was pretty messed up at the time. I knew I had a lot of self-hatred and I didn't like myself at all. So then I kind of took that and reversed it. So I'm like, what if I can make myself happy? And, I started asking myself what would make me happy. And I ended up making a goal to become a career counselor to change my job field in the Army. It was a 9 month goal, which turned into a 3 year goal. And that's kind of when I officially say I kind of like changed my mind, is when I actually reached that goal.
Yeah.
Wow, that is
So
powerful.
like the turning point that you talk about looking at pamphlets. You talk about looking at one of them and and going, am I in the category of the people that don't really want to die. I
Mhm.
just don't see any other way through this. Do I really want to die? That's a pretty powerful moment.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that it really highlights the difference between passive and active suicidal ideation. Because I think for a lot of us, for a lot of the public, like when they think of suicidal ideation, a lot of people think of the very active kind. But for a lot of people, I mean, people will get there, but there are steps along the way, and that it's important to recognize that you do need help along those ways, not just when you get to the active part of it.
Yeah. In fact, it makes me very curious for to understand a bit of the background story that that predates when you ended up in the hospital. Like what's your story? What happened? How did you get to this point in life?
Yeah, I'll try to go through a little faster because, I just created a YouTube channel and I sat down and, did the full story. And I had to split it like the three parts because it takes like an hour and a half just to like get all the stories out there. But so I come from Rockford, Illinois, not a very good city. So it's rated 5 out of 100 on like the crime index, meaning 95% of the United
Mm,
States is safer than that city. I grew up there the first 18 years of my life. I was
mm,
also in poverty. So I moved about 16 times before I was the age of 18.
mhm,
I've lived in everything from like a house, apartment, trailer, farm, all the way down to like a motel. I've lived with my mother, my father. I've lived with grandparents, two different aunts. I've also lived with like friends of family and stuff like that. So I had a very unstable life, even before I joined the military. And then I also went to like 7 different schools, and by that time, I didn't make a whole lot of friends. I was already a shy kid, and that kind of isolated me even more with how unstable my life was. And it kind of like got to the point where I became like mute. Before by the time I was in middle school, I wouldn't talk to you. Like even when it came to like presentations with the teachers, I'm like, hey, if it required me to talk, I'll take the 0 every time. So that really hurt me for a while, and then from there, I was also a very easy target to bully. So my last name is like Fish. I was probably like 5'8", 120 pounds. So I was like the easiest. I was very easily targetable, and I made myself a target quite pretty easily. And then I actually get
mm,
to the stories itself in my book, and this is where it takes a turn, and this is where the actual book starts. Because the background, it sounds like hard enough as it is, and then I still turn the stories, and it starts ramping up very quickly. And I put all of this in chapter 1 because I wanted to grab the audience's attention right away. I'm like, hey, these are all the things that have happened, and it kind of sets the premise for the book.
mm,
So in 2016, I was getting ready to graduate high school.
mhm,
I was about a month from graduating high school, and then I was going to join the military immediately after that. So it's the summer of 2016. I believe it was a Friday. Got off the bus, and I was living with my father at the time. We were living in an apartment complex of about 20 or 30 people. Get off that bus, notice our apartment complex is swarmed with about 10 police vehicles. And, before I even got off the bus and I kind of looked back on my life because I already knew, we came from like bad situations. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to have a very good day, am I? So got off that bus, went up to them. They confirmed it. Gave them my apartment number. They're like, hey, we can't allow you to go up the stairs right now. We don't want you to see what's going on. So they had to escort me off the premises. Then they took me down my aunt's, which was about 2 miles down the road. And then that's when they start filling us in with the details. They're like, "Hey, his father's at the hospital because he just resisted arrest. We had to tase him, sedate him, and then take him to the hospital." And that's all the information they gave us right then. So then we had to go to the hospital. We get there, we see my father. He's in bad condition, so his arms are like covered in blood and scratches, and he's also like handcuffed to the bedpost, stuff like that. He's pretty angsty at the time, and the reason we find out about that one, he didn't want to see his child there or his family looking at him in the condition he was in. But the part was that the nurses and the doctors are like, hey, what we found was that there was fireball whiskey and cocaine in his system. So essentially, what happened, he was pretty much pumped with adrenaline and went nuts in that apartment. And then after that, because it was still Friday, I was still going to school. I had to go back to the apartment complex, and that's how bad we found out things really were. So we open the door, and the first thing my aunt says, she's like, if we didn't just see your father in the hospital, we would have thought he got murdered because that entire apartment complex was pretty much covered in blood. So, like the walls, the ceilings, the floor, and then everything also in that apartment was also broken. So the first thing I imagine it was broken was probably like this glass table, which is where all the cuts, the scratches came from.
Mm,
But it was also like TVs, laptops, refrigerators, cabinets, like everything that was could be possibly broken was. And we even had like an AC vent that was like hooked into the wall. And somehow there was like so much adrenaline that was going through the system. He threw the AC vent through the window somehow. So that'll give you like an idea of like how much adrenaline was going and how much strength was going on at that time and why he
mhm.
resisted and why they had to take him down. And that's like the first of 3 stories that I start the book with.
Mm, gotcha. That context of tumultuous, chaotic. How could someone, in terms of what you described of your life, how could someone have a sense of foundation or security? You moved 16 times. You like there's one point at which I'll just absolutely disagree with you. And the disagreement point is you said you made yourself a target. And like I just that
Yeah,
some part of me on the inside went, nah, no, I think that's probably
yeah,
bullshit. I don't think
yeah,
you made yourself a
Fair
target.
enough.
I
Fair
think
enough.
that
no, no,
there's
no,
a
yeah, yeah.
lot of people out there that think for some reason that it makes them tough or they for whatever reason they need to pick on somebody. And what do you do? Well, you pick the one that you think isn't gonna be a threat.
Mhm.
So but how could you even have a sense of security, right? I mean, that certainly resonates with me. Trent, I imagine you have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, no, dude, you picked up on the same thing that I did. And I like, like Devin, when you said, I made myself a target, I was like, like there's that sense of that like inner critic or different things. I'm like, ooh, if this was a therapy session, I'd be like, okay, like let's talk to that inner critic there. Cause
Yeah.
it sounds like you've done a lot of work with it, but it also sounds like every once in a while that pops up and really it comes to the narrative that you tell. It's so interesting because for a lot of us, that we have like human beings are naturally storytellers. So we not only tell stories to each other, but we tell stories to ourselves, and we're constantly telling stories about who we are. So for me personally, I wonder in some ways, like just sort of like going back to your book, it's the idea of when it comes to a human being, they always say that, the life story that we write. Whereas for me personally, I kind of look at our life stories almost like a museum. And I'm wondering for you, like when you think about this, how are you sort of like taking those exhibits of your life and potentially recontextualizing them for yourself? Because, you know, an exhibit is always growing and changing, whereas a book in some ways is kind of static. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think I had a poor choice of words. I had all the formulas to be bullied. I didn't choose it for myself. Clearly, no one wants to be bullied. I don't think.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, totally.
there's some weird things out there. But to go where the actual book was, I think I talk about it very briefly. But essentially,
Mm-hmm.
what I did with the about the first 4 chapters is that my mind has completely changed from what it used to be, and so I had essentially drag my mind back into that hell. I had to recreate my stories. I had to relive
Mm-hmm.
those images and relive those scenarios. And then
Mm-hmm.
essentially recreate them to where I'm like, okay, how can I use this to help someone learn from it, rather than see it as like a story of like suffering.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
I
right, right,
oh yeah,
right.
yeah. Absolutely. And I mean like that's where you take it from a contamination narrative really to like looking at as your hero's journey. I mean, for those of us that have watched The Lord of the Rings, Frodo could almost look at like that trial through Mount Doom as something that really crushed him, whereas for you it was like, no, that helped to forge you into who you are. And am I wrong?
No, so I was just talking to him right before we started the show that I was writing earlier. And actually one of the things I was writing about was actually being forged from like suffering to where it didn't
Mm.
actually break me, but it ended up building my character, and it's changed me. I'm going probably on the third major change in my life to where it's like I'm doing something like completely new, even though I just, recreated this character. And I'm pretty much starting from scratch again and, you know, going from there.
Yeah. There is something I want to say to you because it's very important to me. And then I want to connect into something that is, I want to say thank you for your service. Every
Mm,
single time I see a veteran, it doesn't matter who, when, where they've served. I want you to know that I appreciate your service. And then connecting back to what we were saying, what we were talking about, and Trent's point, there's something I think really critical in how you described you writing this book. So from the outside, looking at this from a therapist lens, one of the things that we do often is when people are ready is a trauma narrative. And this becomes important not because of just the exact details of what happened, but as best as we can, putting things into time and space. And that actually really helps because it helps us to understand ourselves and to piece things together, to be able to even look at what and understand what happened to me. From there, then we go, what happened inside? Because it's what happened inside me that continues to live today. And you talked about this transformation. You talk about I'm a different character. I think that was actually the word that you used than I was in the first chapters of the book.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, I've done it a couple times because, before I wrote the book and then while I was writing the book, I was changing. And then after I wrote the book, I went in, a completely different direction that I wasn't expecting before I wrote the book.
Mm.
And so that has been a continuous process. And I've kind of like acknowledged that when I was like recreating the story, I'm like, okay, this is who I used to be. This is what I was at the time. This is who I am now. And this is kind of like the direction I'm going in. But yeah, it's kind of cool, looking back on it, because I had to recreate a lot of events. Because when I was mapping out my moves when I was younger, because I've moved probably upwards of 30 times now, when you include, me going back and forth with like my military rotations and stuff like that. And so I had to sit down and I actually had to write on paper. I'm like, okay, this was my first place I lived in. This is where this happened. This is where this happened. And, that was just, one of the chapters. And I'm like, I could probably write an entire book just on me moving 16 times. And then I had to, kind of collapse that in like to 10 pages to not pull, the book entirely into something different. And then I sat there, I mapped out like my early military career. Mapped out the stories. I wrote a page about faith. I wrote another page about being blackmailed. And then I wrote about, kind of what I was currently doing at the time as well. So it really is like, 26, 28 years of storytelling all in one book.
I just, when I hear that, it really speaks to me in this, like, with this idea that we're always in a constant state of becoming. And, I really wonder for you, like, if you had something you could share with people, like, in terms of like a key thing where you're talking about like, this constant reinvention, what's something that you would want to share to people like that want to start going down this path for themselves?
Yeah, so one of my favorite quotes in the book, and I still love it to this day, is "In truth, you will find redemption." So there's a long time so probably for the first like 22 years of my life, I kind of like lied to myself about who I actually was and what was going on in my life. So you guys kind of picked up on it earlier to where I was like, I made myself a target to be a bully, right? So that's kind of one of those kind of things to where I also have to be truthful. I'm like, no, I had the formulas to be bullied, but I didn't want to be bullied myself. And so it's constantly trying to find out, where the truth is in your story.
Mm.
But that is one of the big ones that I do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You can
I'm
see me
just,
light up, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, go,
Mm.
go, dude, go, because you have
Okay.
something you want to say.
Yeah. It's just, where is the truth in my story? Like
Mm,
there's such an anchor to hold on with that,
mm,
because I ask you what if obviously you got a big story. So I'm not talking about that, but if you could take a second to think about what your truth used to be. What did you used to tell yourself that you've come to realize is not true?
Well,
good
absolutely.
question.
I used to absolutely say, I'm like, I hate you. I hate the army. I hate people. I hated, God. I was very anti-religious at the time, but most importantly, I was like, I hate me. And that was, at the moment, that was very true. And that was kind of me, trying to change my career field because I didn't like who I was. So I had to accept that truth at the time. And then I'm like, okay, well, let me try to change my character. Let me try to become someone I want to be. And so that was, part of me, seeking truth at that moment.
What was it, the things that you told yourself? Like, did you tell yourself Like, in what way were you not a good enough person to like?
I really didn't have anything good going on in my life, but one of the things that was going on in 2019 for about a year straight, and this was on several different occasions, I was getting blackmailed. Part of the reason was that, I said I hated myself, so I was looking for love in other people, because I couldn't
Mm,
find it in myself, and so that hooked me onto like a desperate chain of getting blackmailed. And the thing was, like, when I was getting catfished, when I was getting scammed and everything like that, I knew that they weren't real people. I knew that they wanted my money, but I would give it to them. And if they wanted pictures, I would give them the pictures and everything like that. And so that really created someone that I didn't like being. So
mm,
that had to do with it. But I also had a lot of self-hatred just, looking back on my life and how everything was going. I initially
mm.
blamed my parents, I initially blamed the school system, the city, and then eventually I'm like, well, I left the army and then I left all that stuff. So eventually I was like, maybe it was just me. And then, and like I said, so I had to take partial accountability and say, okay, well, some of these things, are absolutely true and I absolutely hate about myself. But then there was like that other aspect where it's like, okay, maybe I'm lying to myself. And then I was trying to find the truth after that.
Devin, I'm curious because you talked about, again, I want to relate this back to the bullies because sometimes I wonder, because you say the narrative that you viewed, I'm wondering what were some of the lenses from people in your life that you were given that maybe helped to form your initial perspective. Does that make sense?
So like, why do I feel like, I had
Uh,
the formulas of to where
no.
why I thought I was
Well,
getting bullied, or
no, because sometimes we can internalize the perspectives of other people and then use that to reflect on ourselves. So you mentioned about the bullies. I'm wondering about like, friends, family. How were you treated by them?
like friends, well, I didn't have too many friends growing up. I had a few here and a few there. As far as family, I never really connected with my family too much. I was always kind of like this lone wolf. My family is actually pretty loud, and I was like probably the quietest in my family. And so even, if you look at my father, where he's kind of like, the odd person out, everyone else is like country and he's like all tattooed in the punk and metal scene. So it was kind of like one of those things to where that was also kind of why I was isolated because I never felt like I belonged in a group.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that actually cuts exactly into what you're referring to. Like, you say, what is my truth? Well, if my truth is I don't belong, then why am I gonna like myself? No one else, if no one else seems to like me. And I think, am I on the right track in terms of the line of thinking that you're thinking of Trent, this kind of internalization of these messages? They're not always things that someone says to you. They're
No,
things you
no.
experience.
Yeah, they're implicit. Yeah, like from an IFS perspective, I would almost call those legacy burdens. I look at those almost kind of like hand-me-down sweaters. Sometimes like if you've ever watched A Christmas Story and you see like Ralphie come out in like the pink bunny outfit that his aunt gives him because that's how she views him, but he hates it. But the thing is with these internalized messages, we put these things on, they don't fit, but that's what we're given. So we just go with it, even though, it's itchy, maybe it's too tight. And then we have to realize what we're wearing, take it off, and find what suits us.
Got you. Yeah.
Yeah, so this becomes interesting to me because the a platform, the stage that you set a stage where you didn't have, if we were to use a metaphor of a garden, then you didn't have really nice fertilized soil that you were planted in that you had the ability to grow from. I heard you mention earlier about church, and we talked a little bit about it off screen. And it's that the whole notion of the law of the harvest, that things, the seeds get spread around, and some of it is in better soil than others. And that's certainly not about blame. I'm not blaming anybody, just the facts. And you come to this idea about yourself, and you got to find a different truth. Like The idea that I don't belong, that's not a truth to build a life from.
Mm-mm.
So how did you start to challenge those fundamental truths, or what we would call cognitive schema, beliefs, whatever you want to say? I think the way you said it is brilliant. I needed to understand actually what was true.
Yeah. So it didn't really, it was kind of one of those things to where it was kind of like a 3-year event. But even like after the 3 years, when I kind of like completed that goal, I was still learning. I was still like seeking truth, and that's why I think I eventually ended up writing this book. And one of the things I kind of noticed is like even when I kind of changed my mind, I still almost felt like I was alone, and I still felt like isolated and everything like that. Even when I changed a bunch of things in my life. And it actually took me when I started speaking about the book to realize I wasn't alone. I think I talk about this in chapter 7 or chapter 8, where I say, silence was no longer an option. So, right around when I finished the main part of the book and I was about to lock in the manuscript, I was also getting ready to present it into a PowerPoint to some people. And I ended up presenting it to about 200 or 300 people. It was for suicide awareness, kind of where I give my background. I give the 3 stories. I give them the story about the hospital, the lessons I learned, and then some of the things I was working on at the time. And then in that PowerPoint, I kind of asked the audience 7 questions. One of them was, "Have you ever been blackmailed?" And I always thought I was going to be alone when I asked that question, but every time I've asked it, I've done the PowerPoint about 5 times. There was always at least 10 to 20 people who would raise their hands. And that's kind of when I knew my story. And this is as I was writing the book in 2025. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not alone. It's just everyone. And then I put in a sentence. I'm like, it's a story people want to hear, but no one wants to be the first one to tell it.
Hmm.
Wow. You know
Mm-hmm.
what? That right there is such a powerful statement because like, as I hear that, like we all want this sense of validation, normalization, but it's kind of like being the first one to, you know, raise their hand in the class because it's like, you know, again, to what story are we telling ourselves? Like, but and what does the evidence say?
But when we realize that we're not the only one that has had pretty messed up stuff happen to us, that have had some rough things through our life, we can start to realize we're not different. And other people, us saying it is so important, just like you said, because you open up the floor that someone else is going to be willing to say, "Yeah, me too."
Hmm.
Yeah. And, well, that was one of the main things I wanted to do with this book is, and, going back to the title, let it be the end of the chapter, not the end of the book. So the alternate title, it was a little grim, so I ended up changing it. But it was the untold consequences of suicide. Pretty much what I explained is like, if I were to end my life, then I'm taking away the answer that someone else was looking for. And so with this book, I'm like, I want to give hope back to the hopeless. And so yeah, so when I think about someone reading the book, I'm like, maybe they're reading in the book because they're in the exact same situation I'm in, and they're just trying to figure out how I did it, so that they, you know, they have like an option there, and to where their story is no longer impossible. And so that was the main
Hmm.
premise of the book.
Yeah. If it's okay, I was hoping to shift gears a little bit and kind of connect back to a point that you had come to where you're like, okay, this is just before I got into the military. Then you went in as an enlisted personnel.
Yes, yes, it did.
And what did you go into? What element of the military, what trade were you?
So yeah, so I was the Army. So I originally enlisted to be a 68 Charlie. That didn't end up working out for me. Hard school ended up failing out. So, well, I guess I can run through my early military career real quick. But I initially went to be a 68 Charlie, went to basic training, failed out of basic training the first time because I wasn't good at shooting rifle. Went to basic training for the second time, passed. Went to Fort Sam Houston to become a 68 Charlie, which is a nurse. Got there, they're like, hey, the school's a 70% dropout rate. Made it for about 5 weeks, failed out of that school. So then I became a 19 Delta, which was a cavalry scout, completely different than, being a nurse, pretty much opposite of what I signed up to be. And I had to do this for about, 5 years. And then I failed out of that one. And then when I became a 19 Delta, I had to go back to basic training for the third time because their training was linked to their basic training. So I was stuck in the basic training environment for about a year straight when all this was going down. Yeah.
That's a lot of getting yelled at.
Yes, it
That's a
is.
lot of getting yelled at. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Hmm. So then what trade did you land in?
So so when I went to basic training for the third time, I passed, and then I became the 19 Delta, which is a cavalry scout. Essentially, it is the eyes and ears for the commander on the battlefield. So we're like, hey, enemies over here, and then everyone else can do their part. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And then the other thing that I really wonder about, of course, because I work in my regular job for the military in mental health, and one of the things I'm always fascinated about, lots of people have the story of coming into the military within a fractured foundation in terms of their attachment foundation, where they came from, and they often find like a family in the military that was a closeness that they didn't experience in other parts of life. I don't assume that that's true, but I've just heard the story so many times. What happened for you in terms of building a sense of community while you were in the military?
So I guess mine was a little bit of a mixed bag. So me joining the military was kind of by accident because I was failing out of class. My father was fed up with my attitude and my rebellion at that time. So he's like, "Hey, you're going to go get a job. You're going to pay for this class. I'm not doing anything else for you." He's like, "I've been way too nice for you your entire life." And so during the summer, I was doing a bunch of resumes, and I would just tear the resumes up after I sent him a picture because I was like, "I'm not getting a job." One day he's like, "Hey, have you thought about joining the military?" I was like, "Sure, get some off my back." But then we ended up going, I ended up liking what they said. And the big thing about it, this was like the delayed entry program. So once a week, I had to go there and work out with them. I wasn't expecting it at the time because I hated working out, but I actually quite enjoyed it because that was the first time that I started, building a family with the recruiters and then the other people who are getting ready to join the army as well. And so I did that for about a year because I started right at my senior year. And then that actually really helped me, for example, like when I was in my father's situation, because it's like, okay, now I no longer have to worry about, what my father's going through because I'm leaving the city, I'm about to go start a new life. You know,
Mm.
it it didn't go great for like the first year, but and then once I got into the actual military and I had some other significant events happen. But as far as the family, it did start off to where it did, kind of feel like a family. We went on a rotation once I got there, got back. From there, everyone kind of started to split up. I kind of started getting isolated again. That's where I started getting into the desperation and the blackmail and everything like that.
Mm.
I went to the hospital, got out of there. I ended up getting separated from the platoon at that time. I ended up kind of doing my own thing for about a year straight. And then once I got back from that deployment after the hospital trip, I found, well, it was the career counselor field to where I found he essentially turned into like my mentor during that deployment. And then when I got back, he passed me on to the next one because he had a PCS. That one ended up being my senior career counselor. She ended up taking me to board and she helped get my package solidified. But, while I was waiting, another 2 years for her to go to my school, she would take me with the other career counselors. And that, kind of started a new family to where, I felt like that belonging again. So that was one of the big connections that I had like outside of the hospital while everything else was going on. So there were different periods to where it's like, sometimes I was alone or felt isolated, but there was also times where I found like friends, mentors, and then it felt like a family. And then even when
Mhm.
I became a career counselor, it was all like we're pretty close knit to where, there's five of us. There's only five of us in like an entire battalion of like 500 or 1,000 people. And so we're talking to each other every day. And that's kind of how the field is to where we have that closeness to, because there's not too many of us in the army at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah. So there's one of the things that I want to do a little bit of translation for. That is, if we were talking about this from the Canadian Armed Forces perspective, or they call it the CAF, we'd be talking about career managers. And for a while there, wasn't sure exactly how this lined up in my head. I was confused. But so you would be the ones that would be connecting with the troops around their career development, around their advancement, around the trade that they're in, within trade specific processes, if I got that correct.
Yes. So the
Mm,
easiest way to explain it for someone who's not in the military, we are kind of like the recruiters inside the military. So we are the advocates to keep the soldiers in. We do their contracts. We help them
yeah,
PCS. We help change their career
yeah,
fields. And
yeah,
because I want to change my career field, that is, what I use to help, kind of change who I was as a person at that time.
yeah, yeah.
And then that's kind of where I got my sense of like, okay, I can go back to what I originally wanted of
Mm.
helping people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Hmm. Yeah. So your transition yourself was into helping change your own career inside the military so that you were able to actually give that same level of kind of assistance in other people's career development. That's powerful. Like it's the same sort of thing as, how can you help others if you haven't first come to a centered place yourself?
Ep yeah, absolutely, and I kind of, I think I dedicated a subsection to it to where it's like, when I say I had to, like, create a new character, I literally had to do that because it's like, if we look back at the story, I hated the Army, I became an advocate for the Army. I didn't like people, I have to talk to people, every day, and then I was a pessimistic person, so I had to become very optimistic, to actually, do good in the career field. I can't just be like, "Oh, no, you should get out the Army," absolutely, I get kicked and fired right away. So yeah, that goal, helped me change as a person itself. It wasn't necessarily becoming a career counselor, but what I had to do to become the career counselor, if that makes sense.
Mhm, mhm.
Characters in a story, Trent, characters in a story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. No, like the only thing, like what I
Mhm.
almost think about this is that like all of those qualities were inside of you. It's just you needed that environment to really hone and express them. Like we all like that's the thing is that like when we talk about resilience on multiple levels, like human beings do have the ability to be like to change to be that main character. It's just they have to have the people and the environment to support them and then the willingness to go through that as well.
Yeah, so yeah, I was not suited to be a scout, so I know you could see me with my glasses, but I don't have depth perception. So I learned that, when I became a career counselor, that I was never supposed to be a scout. So literally was not made for my body. I'm not good at any of that, and I don't have the right mindset. I don't have the right attitude. It takes a very special person, to like that kind of job field because it is, still in the combat arms and everything like that. And that had nothing to do with kind of my personality. So it was literally kind of, asking a fish to swim out of water. And I talk about it a couple times, and like for the first 5 years of my career, like I didn't get like any huge recognition or like any awards like that. But as soon as I went to become a career counselor, I got an award for going to this board. Did full time retention. I did all these other things, and
Mm,
I
mhm.
really start. That's where I started to shine in my military career. Is like once I found something that I was good at, and I pursued that, every day, and that's part of the thing that helped me change my mind. It's like, okay, I'm not, so worthless as I thought I was. It's just I was just in the wrong area.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
It's kind of like the right puzzle piece finding the right puzzle because I mean it's almost like in some ways yeah you needed to be like you could try and be like a clown piece in a dog puzzle. I mean sure that would kind of work maybe depending upon what it is, but you needed to really feel at home.
yeah, Devin, I really like that you used your last name in your analogy. Like that was brilliant. In my
Yeah.
head, I
uh,
can't remember who said the quote, but it's like if you expect a fish to climb a tree, it will always think it's a failure.
Yep, that was the
yeah,
quote I was thinking about, but I was like, all right, let me
Mm.
come up with something else spot.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
fair enough.
yeah, totally. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's amazing. So in terms of how people can get connected with you, with your book, with what your the message you're trying to put out, we always give a shameless plug because we only ever have people on our show that we truly believe in their message and that we want to promote in the world. So it's time for your shameless plug. So tell us.
Gotcha. Yeah. So social media, I'm still pretty small right now. I had like an Instagram and like a Threads account, but recently those got swarmed with like bots, so I shut that one down. But I still got my Facebook account. That's still public and everything like that. So they can look me up. My name is like Devin Fish. Last week I did start like a YouTube channel. And you brought up earlier, but no one took the YouTube name of Answering the Hard Questions. So I'm like, all right, take it before someone else gets it again. So yeah, that is the name of the YouTube channel right now. I think I've uploaded like 5 or 6 videos. Again, you'll get the full story back there. It takes like an hour for me to actually sit down and, map the entire story out, and I talk about it a little bit throughout it. But it's also a reflection of my book, to where I'm going to go back. I'm going to look at my book again. I'm like, okay, this is what I got right. This is what I got wrong. And then continuing to ask the questions that I also present the readers with. So I'm trying to make a channel to where it's like interactive, to where it's not just me talking to a camera, but that it's actually engaging with the audience and stuff like that.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And if people want to pick up your book, where can it be purchased, man?
Yeah, so it should be in most online shops. So like Barnes and Noble online has it, Kindle has it, Knoble has it. So it's offered in like ebook. It's offered on paperback and hardcover. It is on Amazon. So yeah, so most online places. I don't know if it's in any stores yet. I haven't been told, at least. But most places you get books, you could probably find it.
Awesome. Any audiobooks in the future? Maybe I'm a big audiobook fan.
Once I get like a audience established, I would like to do it. It's just it costs like, I think they last time they quoted me was it's like $7,000 to do it. So I'm like, all right, let me make sure I got an audience before I go, invest even more into this book that I've already put like what I think
All right.
20,000 into it and something like that. So yeah, it was a big commitment. I do want to do it, but that's kind of what the YouTube might turn into, to where I'm like, reading sections of the book and then kind of reflecting on it now. So it might just, progressively come out, from a YouTube channel as well.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah,
So
that sounds good.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your story, Devin. I really appreciate how, you can definitely tell that you're, a gifted author, in the sense that throughout this whole podcast, as Jeremy and I have been interviewing you, you've been weaving a narrative and really showing like the most important thing about always having that constant state of becoming, and that a human being really isn't solidified, and that we're always, we just need to find our place and find the people that are there to support us. And that it's about, like I said, asking the hard questions, and about, doing your best to be resilient. So I really appreciate you sharing your story.
As always, I love telling the story, and the more times we tell the story, then by telling, our stories, not just mine, but, yours as well, that we take the impossible out of someone else's story. It's another one of those quotes that I loved in the book, and that's normally how I like end like a PowerPoint or like a speaking thing. And I think it's just a powerful message, and to, give people hope back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have
Thank
to
you
pick
so
up that.
much for being on the show.
Yeah.
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 Like, I think that point right there that you made, that we take the impossible out of somebody else's story, I think that really is what we want to leave as the message, as the mic drop. Wouldn't you say, Trent?
I would say I'm gonna have to pick up that book and definitely get a highlighter, dude, because I love good quotes.
All
Okay.
right. Well, on that note, thanks again, Devin, for joining us on the show. And I'm Jeremy Alcorn,
I'm Trent Akers. See you next time.
signing out. See ya.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this message has been as meaningful to you as it has been to us. If you're looking for help, you can find us on Facebook at Humanizing Mental Health.